The elevator stopped exactly one floor below the finish line, and only one person was allowed to step out alive. On one side stood Adrian, a billionaire whose name was printed on skyscrapers, private jets, and luxury resorts across the world. His custom suit was torn, his hands were shaking, and for the first time in decades, money meant absolutely nothing. Across from him stood Leo, a construction worker who had spent his entire life fighting overdue bills, sleeping in a tiny apartment, and wondering if tomorrow would finally be easier than yesterday. Between them rested a single steel box with a blinking countdown clock. 3 minutes remained. The voice echoing through the empty tower spoke with chilling calm. Everything you have ever owned, or everything you have ever dreamed of, ends here. Neither man knew why they had been chosen. Neither knew who had built this impossible game. But somewhere above them waited a reward greater than wealth itself, while somewhere below, failure meant disappearing forever, without leaving behind a single trace. Adrian reached for the box first, but Leo grabbed his wrist. Their eyes locked, not with hatred, but with confusion. The billionaire whispered, "This doesn't make any sense." Leo answered with one sentence that somehow made everything worse. "It wasn't supposed to be you." Before Adrian could ask what he meant, the lights died. The countdown continued in complete darkness. 2 minutes and 47 seconds remained. 24 hours earlier, Adrian had awakened inside his glass mansion overlooking the ocean. Every morning followed the same perfect routine. Personal trainers, assistants waiting with coffee, financial reports showing another fortune earned while he slept. His calendar was filled months in advance, yet somehow every day felt emptier than the last. Hundreds of employees depended on his decisions, but nobody truly knew him. At that same sunrise, nearly 2,000 miles away, Leo climbed onto an old city bus, carrying a dented lunchbox. Rain soaked through the roof, as passengers silently stared out the windows. His boots were worn down, his phone screen was cracked, and his bank account barely covered rent. Yet when an elderly woman struggled to stand, Leo immediately offered his seat with a tired smile. He had almost nothing, but somehow still found ways to give. Neither man realized invisible cameras had been following them for months. Every choice, every lie, every sacrifice, every selfish act, someone had been watching. As evening arrived, both received identical black envelopes without return addresses. Inside was only a metal key and 7 words. "Your final challenge begins at midnight. Come alone." Adrian laughed before tossing the envelope into the fireplace. His security chief insisted it was probably another publicity stunt. But an hour later, every digital screen inside his mansion suddenly displayed a single live video feed. It showed Adrian sleeping in his own bedroom from an angle no security camera could possibly reach. The screen flickered, and the mysterious voice calmly asked, "Do you still believe this is a joke?" At almost the same moment, Leo unlocked his apartment door and found every photograph of his late mother carefully arranged across the kitchen table. Each picture had been taken from places no stranger should have been able to access. Beneath the last photo sat another note. "If you ignore the invitation, someone else pays the price." Leo searched every room. Nothing. No footprints. No broken windows. Just silence. Midnight arrived. Adrian's convoy raced toward the coordinates with armored SUVs and armed guards. Leo borrowed his neighbor's old motorcycle because he couldn't afford enough gas for his own broken car. Both journeys ended at the same abandoned skyscraper, hidden beyond the city skyline. Its windows reflected no light, no company logos, no signs of life. Inside waited hundreds of people dressed in identical gray clothing, standing perfectly still without speaking. Rich entrepreneurs, teachers, nurses, athletes, homeless veterans, influencers, farmers, famous faces and forgotten ones. None understood why they had been summoned. A massive steel door slowly closed behind them, with a thunderous boom that echoed through the building. Every phone instantly lost signal. Every exit locked. Then the ceiling came alive with enormous digital numbers. 100 participants. 12 challenges. 1 survivor. Gasps spread through the crowd. Some laughed nervously. Others pounded desperately against the sealed doors. Adrian immediately demanded to speak with whoever was in charge, flashing his wealth and influence like weapons he had used his entire life. The only response came from hidden speakers. "Money bought you a seat, Character decides who leaves. Across the room, Leo noticed something almost everyone else had missed. The gray uniforms each participant wore carried tiny numbers stitched beneath the collar. His read 100. Adrian's read 1.
Before either man could understand what that meant, the floor beneath 20 contestants suddenly split open. Screams filled the tower as they dropped into darkness. Seconds later, silence returned. The remaining 80 stood frozen, unable to breathe. The voice returned. The game has already begun. Every decision from this moment forward changes someone else's fate. Panic exploded. Alliances formed instantly. Friends abandoned each other before the first official challenge had even started. Adrian offered millions to anyone willing to protect him. Several rushed to his side without hesitation. Leo stood alone. Then a frightened little girl, no older than 12, quietly walked over and held his hand. "I think they're lying," she whispered. "The strongest people aren't the ones they're watching." Before Leo could answer, every screen inside the tower flashed with footage from their private lives, secrets nobody else could possibly know, and Adrian's face suddenly drained of color as one recording began to play that threatened to destroy everything he had spent his entire life building. The room fell silent as Adrian watched himself on the giant screens, standing inside a hospital corridor 15 years earlier. His younger face looked exhausted, but the decision he was about to make would define everything that followed. A doctor handed him 2 contracts. One would save the struggling company he had inherited from his father.
The other would fund an experimental treatment for hundreds of terminal patients. Adrian signed the business contract without hesitation. The hospital wing closed 6 months later. The recording ended before revealing the consequences, leaving the crowd to imagine the rest. Angry whispers spread like wildfire. Adrian clenched his fists. "You don't know the full story," the mysterious voice answered before anyone else could. "Neither do you." Then another recording appeared, this time showing Leo, years earlier, standing in front of a burning apartment building. Smoke poured from broken windows, while terrified people screamed from inside. Firefighters hadn't arrived yet. Without thinking, Leo ran into the flames.
The footage cut away before showing what happened next. The silence that followed carried a completely different feeling. Adrian noticed it immediately. The room had judged him in seconds while offering Leo respect without asking for proof. That realization hurt more than he expected. Before anyone could process what they had seen, thick steel walls shifted, separating the survivors into smaller groups. Leo found himself with the frightened girl, a retired nurse named Maria, a former Marine called Jackson, and a quiet teenage programmer named Ethan, whose hands never stopped shaking. Adrian was placed with a celebrity lawyer, a ruthless hedge fund manager, an Olympic champion, and 2 strangers whose expressions revealed nothing.
A timer appeared overhead. 10 minutes. The next challenge was already beginning. The voice spoke with terrifying precision. Each team must cross the Hall of Balance. 6 people enter. Only 6 may leave. But not everyone will cross in the same way. 88 massive doors slid open to reveal a bridge stretching across an enormous underground chamber. Hundreds of glass panels formed the floor, suspended above complete darkness. Some panels were solid, others would shatter under a single step. No markings, no clues, just a path of invisible danger. The first teams rushed forward, believing speed would increase their chances. It did the opposite. One confident businessman stepped onto the wrong panel, and the glass exploded beneath him.
His scream echoed for only a second before disappearing into the abyss. Panic instantly replaced confidence. Every remaining contestant froze. Adrian studied the bridge with the eyes of a man who had built billion-dollar companies by spotting patterns others ignored. "There has to be a system," he muttered. The hedge fund manager smirked. "Or, we can let someone else test the panels first." He grabbed one of the silent strangers by the shoulder and shoved him toward the edge. The man stumbled, barely catching himself before falling. Adrian instinctively pulled him back. Even he looked surprised by his own reaction. "We don't sacrifice people," the hedge fund manager laughed. "Really? That's new." Across the chamber, Leo's group faced the same impossible choice. Jackson volunteered to lead, but Maria stopped him. Heroes die first in games like this. Ethan stared at the ceiling, searching desperately for anything unusual. Then he noticed tiny reflections dancing across the glass. "Wait," he whispered. "The lights." Everyone looked up.
The giant spotlights above the bridge flickered almost too subtly to notice. Certain panels reflected slightly warmer light than others. Ethan wasn't certain what it meant, but it was the only clue they had. Leo trusted him. Their first step landed safely. Then another. Slowly, they advanced, while other teams watched in disbelief. Halfway across, the lights suddenly changed.
The reflections vanished. The clue was gone. At the exact same moment, alarms blared throughout the tower. "Challenge updated," the voice announced. "The bridge now collapses in 60 seconds. Every surviving contestant broke into a desperate sprint. Glass shattered everywhere. People pushed friends aside. Some intentionally sent rivals crashing into unsafe panels. The underground chamber became pure chaos. Leo grabbed the little girl's hand and ran. Jackson shielded Maria from flying glass. Ethan shouted directions even after losing the pattern. Adrian found himself only a few steps from safety when the celebrity lawyer slipped. Their eyes met. One hand reached upward. One decision remained. Adrian could save himself or lose precious seconds helping someone who had offered him nothing. His entire life had taught him that hesitation was weakness. Yet for reasons he couldn't explain, he turned back. He caught the lawyer's wrist just as another section exploded beneath them. Together, they leaped onto solid ground a heartbeat before the bridge collapsed into darkness. Behind them, breathing heavily, Adrian realized everyone in his group had survived except the hedge fund manager, who had tried to shove another contestant forward moments earlier. His own betrayal had sent him onto the wrong panel. No one mourned him. The survivors barely had time to recover before enormous screens displayed updated rankings. But they were not ranked by speed, intelligence, or survival. They were ranked by something called human value. Adrian stared at the board in disbelief. Despite surviving every challenge, he had fallen from first place to 37th. Leo had climbed from 100th to 2nd. The little girl was somehow first. Nobody understood how the rankings were calculated. The voice offered only one explanation. Your actions are measured differently than your results. Confusion turned into fear. The contestants could survive every challenge and still lose. Then the lights dimmed again, and every participant received a sealed envelope with their own name printed on the front. Do not open until instructed. Some ignored the warning immediately. The moment the first envelope was torn open, every screen in the tower flashed bright red. Sirens screamed through the building. The contestant who had broken the rule looked around in terror as the floor beneath him began to glow. He begged for help. He apologized. He threw the envelope away. It was already too late. Within seconds, he vanished behind a rising column of white light. When it faded, nothing remained except the unopened letter drifting slowly back to the ground. The survivors stepped backward in horror. The voice spoke more softly than ever before, making every word even more frightening. Curiosity has a price. Trust has a greater one. Open your envelopes. Together. Leo carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single photograph. It showed him standing beside his mother, but the memory was impossible. She had died years before that picture could ever have been taken. Across the room, Adrian unfolded his own photograph, and every drop of blood seemed to leave his face. It wasn't a picture of his past. It was a crystal-clear image of something that hadn't happened yet. He was standing alone on the roof of the tower, holding the steel box, while Leo lay motionless at his feet, surrounded by blood. Before Adrian could even whisper a word, every screen in the building counted down from 10, and the voice delivered the one sentence that shattered every alliance in an instant. One of those photographs is a lie, and one reveals exactly how this game ends. 10, 9, 8, every heartbeat felt louder than the countdown itself. Nobody knew whether to destroy the photographs, hide them, or compare them. Fear spread faster than panic, because this time, the enemy wasn't the challenge. It was uncertainty. By the time the countdown reached 0, every image burst into flames at exactly the same moment, leaving only drifting ash. The evidence was gone. The questions remained. Before anyone could speak, the entire tower shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling as a section of the floor slowly opened, revealing a massive circular chamber below. At its center stood the same steel box from the photograph, untouched, silent, almost waiting. The mysterious voice returned. Everything until now has been preparation. The final challenge begins. The remaining contestants descended into the chamber, but only 36 were left.
64 lives had already disappeared. Around the circle stood 36 identical doors, each marked with a different symbol instead of a number. Choose one, the voice instructed. Choose carefully. Every door leads to the truth, but not every truth deserves to be known. One by one, they entered. Leo stepped through a door marked with a broken compass. Adrian chose one marked with a crown split down the middle. The doors sealed behind them.
Leo found himself inside a perfect copy of his childhood home. The faded wallpaper, the tiny kitchen, the cracked window his mother never had enough money to replace. Then he heard her voice. "Dinner's ready." He froze. She walked into the room exactly as he remembered her, smiling, healthy, alive. Every instinct told him to run toward her, yet something felt wrong. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You can stay here," she whispered. "No more pain, no more games, no more loss." On the opposite side of the room, a single exit door slowly began closing. Leo realized the cruel truth. This wasn't a reward. It was a test. He stepped toward his mother, his eyes filling with tears. "I miss you every day," she smiled. "Then stay." He reached out, almost touching her hand, then quietly shook his head. "If you're really my mother, you'd never ask me to give up." Her smile faded. The entire room shattered into fragments of light. The illusion was gone. The exit door stopped closing. Leo walked through without looking back, carrying the pain with him instead of escaping it. Meanwhile, Adrian entered a luxurious office overlooking an endless skyline. Every award he had ever won lined the walls. Every dream he had ever chased stood right in front of him. Sitting behind the desk was himself. Older, tired, alone. The older Adrian looked up and smiled without happiness. "Congratulations," he said. "You built everything you wanted." Adrian stared around the room. "Where is everyone?" The older man laughed quietly. "They left years ago." He pointed toward another room. Adrian opened the door and found it empty, except for framed photographs. Birthdays he had missed. Family dinners canceled for meetings. Friends whose calls he never returned. Employees who admired his success but feared the man behind it. At the end of the hallway stood the little boy he had once been, holding a toy airplane. "When do we get to be happy?" the child asked. Adrian couldn't answer. The office walls cracked apart. His awards fell to the floor. His fortune disappeared piece by piece, until nothing remained except silence. The older Adrian looked directly into his eyes one final time. "You spent your life buying everything except time." Then he vanished. The survivors emerged back into the central chamber, but something had changed. Their expressions revealed who had faced regret, who had faced temptation, and who had failed. Only 12 contestants remained. The others had chosen comfort over truth. Without warning, the steel box rose from the center of the room. The countdown appeared once again. 3 minutes, exactly as it had in the opening moments. Adrian looked across the chamber and finally understood why the photograph had shown him. Standing here, Leo noticed the same realization. The game had never been about rich versus poor. That had only been the bait. It had always been about what people become when every excuse is taken away. The voice spoke for the last time. "Open the box!" Nobody moved. Finally, Leo stepped forward. Adrian did the same. Together they placed their hands on the lid and lifted it. Inside there was no money, no contract, no key, just a small mirror and a folded piece of paper. Leo unfolded it while everyone watched. It contained only one sentence. "The winner is the person the world is safer with." Silence. Then every light in the tower turned toward the remaining contestants. They realized the game wasn't choosing a winner anymore. They were, one by one, people stepped forward. The retired nurse chose Leo. The Olympic champion chose Adrian. The lawyer, whose life Adrian had saved on the bridge, chose Adrian. The frightened little girl smiled through tears and chose Leo. Jackson chose Leo. Ethan hesitated for several seconds before lowering his head. "The richest man here isn't the one with the most money," he said. "It's the one who gave away the most when it actually cost something." He voted for Adrian. The votes continued until only one contestant remained undecided. It was Adrian. Everyone looked at him. If he voted for himself, he would win. If he voted for Leo, everything he had survived for would be over. His entire life had been built on defeating competitors. This was the last one. Adrian looked at Leo, then at the mirror inside the steel box. For the first time, he didn't see a billionaire. He saw a man who had finally been given one last chance to become someone worth remembering. He smiled, not the confident smile that had appeared on magazine covers. A quiet one, a real one. I vote for Leo. The chamber fell completely silent. Then every locked door in the tower clicked open. The voice returned one final time, but it sounded different now, warmer, almost human. There was never a prize. The walls around them slowly dissolved into transparent glass, revealing thousands of ordinary people watching from outside. Teachers, firefighters, doctors, students, parents, workers, children. The entire challenge had been an experiment, not to discover who was richest,
Not to discover who was strongest, but to answer one question. Can power change a good person? Or can a good person change someone with power? Adrian walked toward Leo and held out his hand. Leo shook it. Neither man had entered the tower as a friend. Neither left as a rival. Months later, Adrian quietly sold most of his empire and used the fortune to rebuild hospitals, schools, and neighborhoods he had once ignored. He stopped putting his own name on buildings. He no longer needed the applause. Leo returned to construction, refusing luxury offers that would have changed his life overnight. But this time he wasn't building apartments. He was helping build the very community centers funded by Adrian's foundation.
People often argued about who had truly won the final challenge. Some insisted it was Leo because he had remained true to himself. Others believed it was Adrian because he had found the courage to become someone completely different. But the steel box, now displayed inside a small museum with the mirror still resting inside it, quietly offered the only answer that mattered. Every visitor who looked into that mirror saw the same reflection, their own. Because the final challenge had never belonged to the rich. It had never belonged to the poor. It belongs to every person who must decide, every single day, whether success will make them bigger or simply make their heart smaller.